Anytime I don't feel like cooking, one pot or one dish meals are always my go to. But I think sometimes there is this misconception that when we cook from scratch, it has to be complicated and fancy. But lazy homemade meals are still homemade meals. So today I want to share with you five really easy, really lazy, but very delicious one pot meals that you can make on those days where you just don't feel like cooking. First up is a really easy chicken and rice that I am making in my Dutch oven. And I am making this in the 30 minutes that I have before I need to take my daughter to gymnastics. So this is really fast to make too. So first I am just searing some chicken thighs in the Dutch oven with a little bit of butter, just maybe 2 or 3 minutes on each side. And while that's searing, I'm also slicing up an onion. One of the secrets to one pot meals for creating more flavor without having to do more work or use more ingredients is to use the cooking process to create flavor. So what I'm doing here is I have the heat bumped up a little bit higher to sear those chicken thighs. And not only does that brown the chicken thighs, but it also creates what's called fond, which are those brown bits in the bottom of the pot. So then when you deglaze the pot, after you take the chicken thighs out and cook the onions, you can take a little bit of water or even white wine and deglaze the pot and then scrape those brown bits up. And that adds a lot of depth of flavor to your one pot meal. The other thing I did to create flavor is once I put the rice in there, I just let it toast for a few minutes because that just creates a little bit more flavor without having to add in more ingredients. So once that rice toasted for a minute or two, I added in chicken broth and I just followed the instructions on the back of the rice bag for how much to put in there. And then I put the chicken back in, tossed in some frozen peas and carrots. Anytime you're feeling lazy or short of time, having some frozen vegetables on hand is so helpful. So I really recommend keeping a few bags in the freezer if you can. Then I brought this to a boil, put a lid on it, and then let it simmer for about 20 minutes. I think this would be really delicious with brown rice and very good with wild rice. In fact, I kind of wanted wild rice with this. But the thing is, on those days when I'm feeling lazy, I usually don't have a lot of time to. Usually my laziness is because I'm so busy. So white rice is definitely the way to go because it cooks a lot faster. And all in all, I had that finished in 30 minutes flat. The reality is I just need to anticipate not wanting to cook. This is just part of life, and at least one day a week, I just don't feel like cooking. So when I can, I try to prepare in advance a little bit. So I had some green peppers in my garden that needed to be harvested. So I took those out and I chopped them up that evening before I went to bed. So that way, no matter what I wanted to cook the next day, I knew that I had at least some green peppers ready to go. I'm going to use those green peppers to make a simple one pot stuffed pepper casserole, which I'll show you in just a minute. But first, I'm going to make a slow cooker chicken teriyaki. So I am batch prepping on this day, and anytime I'm batch prepping, I always get my slow cooker going first. The thing with the slow cooker, when you are trying to just get a lot done and have really easy, lazy cooking, is to just dump the ingredients in there and go. There are a lot of slow cooker recipes that recommend searing things first or bringing it up to temperature first, and I do that sometimes, but when I am feeling lazy, I just dump the stuff in there and get on with my day. So in this case, I am dumping some chicken thighs right into this pot and then some ingredients that would make a teriyaki sauce. So I have a little bit of soy sauce, some honey, rice vinegar, sesame oil, and a little bit of ground ginger. And then I also added in some fresh garlic. On lazy days, I often just use garlic powder, but I had 2 cloves of garlic that needed to be used. But for lazy cooking, anytime I need to chop, I do a rough chop. I very rarely mince things very finely or slice things very finely if I'm not feeling in the mood to cook or if I'm just in a rush. So a rough chop will always get the job done. And then this just goes into my slow cooker. I think I cooked this on low for about 4 hours. You can hardly cook these things too long. So just let it sit in the slow cooker until it at least gets to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. But I'm also cooking some rice in my Instant Pot to serve with this. So I guess maybe technically this is a 2-pot meal, but generally I have frozen rice ready to go in the freezer and I'm actually all out right now. So what I'm doing too is I'm making a big batch of rice in my Instant Pot so we can have some with this meal, and then I'll just freeze the rest for other one pot meals or other dinners down the road. If you can keep things like frozen rice or frozen sourdough bread or some sort of frozen grain, frozen veggie, whatever it is that you like to have on the side, if you can keep that in your freezer, that makes lazy cooking even lazier, because then all you have to do is figure out the protein or the vegetable, whatever it is that you need to make that day. Okay, next up is that one pot stuffed pepper casserole. So every time I have made this, I think I have used ground beef, but ground beef is so expensive right now. It was like $9 a pound at the grocery store. So I opted to use sweet Italian sausage because it was about half the price. And I will say, I think it actually might be better with the sausage. So use whatever you have or whatever is within your budget. But the thing about making one pot meals and lazy meals is that it only becomes lazy when the process is the same. Because if you're always switching up how you do something, and if it's always brand new and you're trying to figure it out, it becomes a lot of mental effort. So here the process is basically the same as the chicken and rice I made earlier in the video. I'm browning the meat, adding in the onions, deglazing the pot, and then scraping up all those brown bits to add flavor. And then I added in all of those green peppers I chopped the night before and some home canned crushed tomatoes. I actually have the instructions for how to can your own crushed tomatoes over on my blog at moonandmagnolia.com. I will leave a link for that in the description box. Oh, and then I also added in some freeze-dried herbs to that pot too. And then I added about a cup and a half of rice. But the thing is about this particular one pot dish that you have to keep in mind for all one pot dishes is that when you're adding something like rice or sometimes pasta, for example, if there's already liquid in there, you need to add less liquid than what the package calls for. So when I made the chicken and rice earlier in the video, there wasn't any liquid in that pot, but those canned tomatoes have a lot of liquid and the peppers were releasing some liquid too. So I probably used only about half of the water that the package called for. So just keep that in mind. Then once that was finished cooking for 20 minutes, I added some shredded cheese, let it melt on top, and this was delicious. My husband devoured this one for lunch. One thing about the cheese is that if you can shred that as soon as you buy it, it's a lot easier than shredding it while you're trying to cook. So on those lazy days, it's not hard to shred cheese, but it's a lot easier if it's already shredded and ready to go. Okay, next up is a creamy tomato and basil pasta. And I love one pot pasta dishes. I know it is not hard to make a sauce in one pot and noodles in another, but it tastes a lot better and the cleanup is easier when you make it all in one pot. So I put in 2 jars of home canned tomatoes, which would be equivalent to probably 1 large can of store-bought crushed tomatoes, 2 cups of chicken broth, and then some freeze-dried herbs and salt and pepper. In lieu of the chicken broth, you could certainly use water, but using chicken broth in one pot meals often just adds more flavor without a lot of extra effort. If you are working with a budget and you want chicken broth, but you don't want to pay for store-bought, you can always can your own. I have instructions for that over on my blog. I will leave those in the description box below. But then I simply just brought that to a boil, put some pasta in there. You could use any type of pasta you want. I just only had spaghetti. Once it was al dente, I added in 1 cup of cream, let it cook for about a minute like that, and then I turned the heat off, covered it, and let it finish cooking just in the warm Dutch oven. From start to finish, this took less than 20 minutes and it was delicious. Of all the meals I made in this video, that one was my personal favorite. I do want to note that in terms of how much pasta to add, that's always a little bit tricky for one pot meals. But in general, for every 8 ounces of liquid, you'll need 4 ounces of pasta. Okay, last up is the easiest sheet pan fajitas. I love sheet pan meals because you just throw things on there and put them in the oven. Now, I should have saved some of those green peppers for this and I didn't even think about it. So for our fajitas, we'll just be having chicken breast and onions, but we have all sorts of fixins and toppings that we can add to our fajitas, like salsa and candied jalapenos and things like that. So I simply just preheated a stone at 425, threw on some chicken breast, rough chopped an onion, and then I just brushed them with avocado oil, sprinkled them with some taco seasoning that I have from Azure Standard, and then popped it in the oven for about 20 minutes. For lazy cooking, I do recommend keeping just a few seasoning blends on hand. I don't lean on those too much, but things like a taco seasoning and Italian seasoning can make cooking really fast and really easy. And then the teriyaki chicken is done. So all I'm doing here is just taking those chicken thighs out. And anytime I make something in a broth or that has a juice like that, I almost always thicken it with the cornstarch slurry so that way we can have a delicious sauce. On my laziest of lazy days, I don't always do that, but I do think it tastes better and definitely the sauce adheres to the food better if you thicken it with a cornstarch slurry. But even if you make the slurry and thicken the sauce, this still took only about, I'd say, 5 minutes of hands-on time when all was said and done. So I served this over a bed of that rice, put the sauce on, and sprinkled it with some sesame seeds, and it was delicious. That's what's cooking around our house on lazy days. Thanks so much for stopping by today.